What do you do when you have it all? That's the question we're going to explore today. Namaste and welcome to the BAPS Better Living podcast, where we take questions that we have about our life and we find a way to elevate them with spirituality. We try and find a answer to them through spirituality. I'm joined by my co-hosts Kashyap and Rashmi. I'm really excited to get into this discussion today. Rashmi, you were telling us about a book you read recently. Talk to us about that book and what started off this inquiry for you.
Sure. There's a famous author, Mitch Albom. A lot of people have read his book, "People We Meet in Heaven," I think, or some version of that, or "Tuesdays with Morrie." And he had written a book called "Have a Little Faith," and it's his exploration of going back to spirituality. And he's someone who's from the Jewish faith, so he has a lot of exchanges with the rabbi, and he also has a really interesting encounter with a Christian pastor. And so the book is his musings on this topic. And he said something that really struck out to me. He said something along the lines, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, over time, he had lost touch with his spirituality, with his religious roots, because everything that he wanted in life, he wanted a great career, he wanted a great wife, he wanted healthy kids, he wanted a nice house. Anything that he had dreamed of, he was able to achieve it. And so, what was the purpose of spirituality in his life anymore? He was praying to God to attain these things, and now he had already attained them. So, what purpose did spirituality or God kind of play in his life? And it was something that I was thinking about. It's, often when we're talking to people or we're talking to people at the Monday or our friends, we kind of come across this, right? Like spirituality or God seems to be like a means to an end. Um, but we do kind of know that we feel ultimately like it should be something more than that.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking a little bit about, I'd like to get maybe your experience, Kashyap, because you are on the other side of the spectrum. I am someone who's still, and maybe Rashmi as well, we're in the striving phase of our life, and maybe you are as well. I'm not trying to impose that you've stopped striving. But I'm in the striving phase of my life. I have a young kid, she's 19 months old. I'm trying to figure out next steps in my career. I'm trying to figure it all out. And there's a lot of striving. And certainly when I pray, when I think about God, there's a lot of that stuff happening where I'm like, God, please get this part of my life figured out. But you're on the other side. You have a successful practice in cardiology. You have attained a lot of these material things. Talk to us about maybe your journey. You're sharing a story before in the green room about getting your first, fancy car and what happened as you kind of progressed along that line. Talk to us about that. What's it been like for you on the other side?
This is an interesting conversation because it really is, essentially what we're talking about is a case for God, a case for spirituality. And, being a Hindu American in the West, we strive very early, and quite often we achieve a good bit at a relatively young age, whether it's material wealth, whether it's societal respect, admiration. You check off a lot of boxes pretty quickly. And it's extraordinary as you get older. And I like to think of myself as not that old, but it's extraordinary how as you get older, you don't really value the things that you once dreamed about. I remember, very clearly the first time I bought a fancy car, it was in residency, and I got this, beautiful new BMW, and I was so excited. I remember the first few weeks I would drive it, I would think it doesn't get any better than this. And I loved that car, and I just loved the way I felt when I drove it. And I loved the way I felt when other people saw me in it, to be honest. And fast forward, 10, 12 years, I remember the day that a tow truck came and I donated it to National Public Radio. And I was so happy that I could donate it because I couldn't figure out a way to get rid of that car. And it just kind of tells you how very quickly the things that we strive for, the things that bring us satisfaction, how quickly they wear off. And it just kind of leads you to think of kind of a pleasure ladder of the things that we strive for and how once we achieve them, we then go on to look for something more. I don't know if you guys have experienced the same thing or not.
Well, I mean, I've heard a lot about this hedonistic treadmill where you get something and you want something a little bit better and a little bit better. But I think what you're saying is something a little bit more subtle, that you got that fancy car And you might have gotten other fancy cars, but you're not on this treadmill. Like you don't think that, well, you have a BMW, now you're going to need to get the newest model, and that's going to give you an extra amount of happiness. What you're saying is that ultimately, whatever happiness you get, it's going to be squeezed out. It's going to sort of chip away. Um, I think the question that comes up for me is that, well, does that mean you just give up wanting these things? How do you keep striving if you know that the material stuff has no juice in it? Because that's the criticism that people have about maybe our way of looking at the world, that it's all temporary, it's all immaterial, so why care? Why strive?
I think we take a step back. I think we have to define kind of the different levels, right?
Sure.
I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal, and it was talking about how the prices of fancy watches, Rolexes and Patek Philippe's and other things like that, have declined in the last few years because so much of the pleasure of having a really nice watch is predicated upon the fact that it's scarce. Not many people have it. But when you show up to work with your nice Rolex or your nice, whatever fancy watch, and you realize everybody else has one, the value you feel from it or the pleasure you have from it diminishes. So then, the next shift that people make is that, okay, material things fade. 10 years ago when you got your first iPhone, it was so exciting. And now I couldn't tell you if I've got an iPhone 15 or an iPhone 17. I just have no idea because it really doesn't matter anymore. So the next shift you make is to experiential pleasure, right? Is, spend your money on experiences, fly first class, get the suite at the hotel, go to the Michelin starred restaurant and these kinds of things. And quite honestly, the first time you fly first class is an extraordinary experience. You're taking pictures, you're texting friends, or you're texting your family, and it feels so good. But by the 5th time you fly or the 10th time you fly, then it's just kind of like it's old hat. It's, the nuts aren't as good or hot tea is not quite as hot as it was before. It kind of loses its luster. So, what I've learned is that, material things wear out, but experiences also kind of fade, right? So then what's left? So, I've got the resources. Buying a fancy car or buying a nice watch doesn't bring me pleasure. So now I'm going to take nice trips and I'm going to do amazing things that are so worthy of the gram. But then after a little while, that kind of fades as well. So what's the next level up? That's the question many people are left with.
I think your question was a good one, right? I think a lot of people feel like it's either I am on a hedonistic treadmill and I'm only seeking pleasure and I'm either trying to keep leveling up, or I have to be a monk and I'm going to go sit in a forest and I'm not going to do anything. But I think what's interesting about our Hindu Shastras and the balance that I think that it strikes, and it's the thing that I think I like the most about Hinduism and being a part of it, is like it's a very balanced approach, I find it to be. And so when we think about Hinduism, we talk about the 4 Purusharthas. So there's Dharma, Arth, Kam, and Moksha. Moksha is this idea of full realization, enlightenment, full salvation. You've attained this enlightened stage. But what about Dharma, Arth, and Kam? It's not that those are diminished pursuits, but it's saying, in our Shastra, or in a Hindu principle, that's within the scope of Dharma, within a righteous means, attain Arth, which is wealth or means, and then fulfill your duties or your desires within a dutiful way, right? So it sounds like I'm hedging a little bit, but it's saying if I have the means and if I've attained them in a righteous way, I didn't go and steal some money or do something else, then it's okay to fulfill your requirements, right? It's okay to fulfill your desires. That might look different for a cardiologist and it might look different for a consultant, right? But either way, I'm allowed to and should pursue those things. But it's also the other side of it, which is if these basic necessities are kind of met, then I can redirect energy towards my spiritual path. And so I think to what Kashyap was saying is initially we're on this ladder, we're trying to accumulate wealth, we're trying to have experience, we're trying to attain things, which is giving us pleasure. It's like an iPhone. Then we graduate out of that. It's not doing it for us anymore. So we go to experiences. I need to travel first class. I need to go to this resort. I need to have the overwater bungalow, whatever those things are. But then eventually, like Kashyap said, you hit at a point where you're that's not really doing it for me anymore because it's so easily attainable. Well, let me then now shift towards services, or let me shift towards something that may be more altruistic. And maybe that's like the first step back towards going into like a spiritual path. Like I've done the Dharmarthikam part. Now I need to start thinking a little bit about the moksha part.
If you look in just kind of society in general, we celebrate those people that commit themselves to service, whether it's helping the homeless, whether it's feeding the hungry, whether it's building, homes for those that, don't have housing, whether it's donating whatever they have. Why is it that we cannot find satisfaction or happiness in charity? Is it not a good thing for me to go and help and give my time, my resources, my energy? Why is it that I won't find satisfaction there? That's a common question. What do you guys think about that?
I think you will find satisfaction there. If you are of service to somebody, if you're of service to, it can be small things, right? Like just helping the example of like a Boy Scout helping an old lady across the street. That's of service and that's fulfilling. I think what ends up happening though is you're still reliant on something to give you some feeling of satisfaction. When it was material things, I needed that iPhone to feel good or to feel excitement or feel something, feel happiness. When I graduated from that, I needed that first class seat. But if I didn't have those things, now I'm no longer happy. Now I'm no longer joyful. I think, let me put it back to you guys. What do you guys think? I think service and being of service is valuable. But do you guys imagine there's a point where now you graduate out of that, it's still not fulfilling you. It's not fulfilling you in the same way anymore.
I think what you're saying is that there is with time and experience, what you're getting to is a progressive realization that the deeper you go, the more happiness you start to experience. So you started off with the material things. Maybe it's a Rolex, maybe it's getting your fancy car. And you realize, well, okay, that's all good, that's all nice, but it's not as satisfying as maybe flying first class. But even that starts to squeeze out. And then you get to the next level, which is maybe you're doing a lot more altruistic things. You're giving your money away, you're giving your time. But I think what we're finding is that with each cycle and with each iteration, if you stick around for it long enough, you realize, well, it's just not enough. I'm giving all this money away, but the world still remains broken. And I still can't give enough. And there's this of not feeling that there's an end to it. It doesn't feel satisfying enough. Maybe a part of you feels that I want to be recognized. Maybe even if you transcend that understanding that I don't want to be recognized, I just want to do it all anonymously, there's an upper limit to what you feel in giving. Not to say that you should stop giving, but I think there's an upper limit to that. And it's telling us that maybe there's a layer even deeper than giving and these charitable initiatives that can be a little bit more satisfying. And I think the deeper we go, and this is what the Hindu way of life teaches us, it says, don't ignore your material needs. Pursue earth, but pursue kam, which is material desires, but then pursue something deeper, which is moksha, which is self-realization and going even beyond self-realization.
I agree completely. I think, the reason service doesn't fulfill completely, it's circumstantial, right? Service is predicated upon how the other party responds. If you're providing service and it's not appreciated, are you going to continue providing service? The service is predicated upon your ability to provide. So for example, if you lose your fortune and you can no longer provide service, how do you feel about that? If you lose your health and you become frail or you become old and you cannot provide physical service, service then fails, right? So service is wonderful. It is fulfilling to a certain degree, but things like ego, expectation, the idea of virtue signaling and performance do creep into it as well. And therefore, even after a certain period of service, you do come to realize that there's something beyond that as well, that you're still left somewhat empty, somewhat unfulfilled. And I think that's where spirituality and God resides.
It reminds me of this story, right? I think it's based on an opera. It's about the clown Pagliacci. You guys might have heard this story before, right? But I think it's such a good example where, there's this, I think, therapist, and they have a bunch of clients cycling in and out of their office, and they'll come to the therapist and they, vent out whatever is bothering them, whatever issues they have, whatever's making them depressed or unhappy. And as a solution, the therapist always says, go and see the clown Pagliacci. It'll lighten you up. It'll put a smile on your face. You'll experience some joy. And so, everyone, her clients or the therapist clients will go to see the clown, and they come back and they're like, man, this was amazing. What a great solution. Like, I feel so much happiness and joy. And every time a client comes, the therapist says, go see the clown Pagliacci. Then one day a client comes and is pouring out all their sorrows and their woes and everything that's holding them back. And the therapist says, go and see the clown Pagliacci. It's going to make you feel a lot better. And then the client says, I am the clown Pagliacci. I'm the clown. And so the clown is saying that, he's performing this service, bringing joy to everyone else. But because he's not internally himself joyful or has certain issues, even though he's serving others, it's not serving himself. And like that, it's exactly kind of the point you're making, Kashyap, by that at some point, he's being of service caps out because some things internally, I'm still relying on something else to bring
Service
that to
is
me.
like sunlight. Service is like sunlight. It provides warmth. It makes you feel good, but it's all predicated upon the environment. If it's raining, if it's cloudy, you may not feel the sun, despite the fact that you're feeling service. And I think then you make the leap away from the sunlight and directly to the sun. And I think that's where God resides. That's where God resides in our lives, because he is the source of happiness, and everything else we experience is fractional relative to that happiness or that warmth or that light.
As you're talking about this story about the therapist who has all these clients coming in, I am reminded of the incredible work that Pramukh Swami Maharaj, our guru, did when he answered more than 700,000 letters over the course of his life. And in each of these letters, he would be acting like a therapist. People are coming up to him and they're asking him about, well, I have an issue with my family, maybe something at work, maybe something in your business, and I want a solution. I want blessings so that I can overcome this. I can attain these things. Going back to this dharma, arth, and kam type of thing. Most of these letters are focused on these three different aspects: that I want more material success, I want to fulfill my desires, help me overcome this certain obstacle, give me an answer to this certain problem. And that's exactly, going back to Kashyap Bhai's point, the answer that Pramukh Swami Maharaj gave time and time again is certainly he would help the person overcome that challenge, but he would give this deeper insight. He would challenge the writer of that letter to go to that next step up, which was this understanding that you are not the body and the mind. The body and the mind has always had these issues, right? Maybe 10 years ago, you're in college and you think that if I just crack this one exam, if I just if I just get the perfect LSAT score or the perfect MCAT score, I'll get into the perfect medical school, I'll get into the perfect law school, I'll do the GMAT, get into perfect business school, and then my life will be set. And 5 years down the line, it no longer matters anymore. In the same way, Pramukh Swami Maharaj certainly helps them overcome that challenge, but tells them that, listen, you've had these challenges come up again and again. And in that moment, it feels like the most important thing. But hey, the only way to get over this is to go a layer deeper, to forget about the temporary nature, or rather to remember that these challenges are ultimately temporary. The pleasure you're getting from them is ultimately temporary. Go deeper, which is understand that you are this eternal being. You are the driver of this car. You are not the car itself. The car is this body mind, which changes, which has these different challenges. The road continuously changes, but you are the driver, and the driver needs something a little bit more nourishing to get through to the next stage. I don't know what's coming up for you guys as you're
I
listening.
like that analogy. The hardware is the body, the software is the mind, and the user is the Atma, is the soul. And if you go back to the pleasure ladder, material things are, look at what I have. Experiential is look at what I did. Service is look who I helped. And spiritual is look who I am. And I think that is what we're trying to get to. But within our faith tradition, it's not just I am the Atma. There's the next step. Correct, Rashmi?
Yeah, I think that's right. I was thinking about the analogy you gave of the sun, and the sun can only do its work if all the other conditions are kind of met, where there's it's not raining, it's not cloudy. And that's kind of the idea. Like if God or if spirituality is the sun, the clouds and the rain and the conditions, those are all the things that are blocking us from feeling our full self, feeling as we're Atma. And those things that are stopping us, those clouds, the rain, those are things like ego. Those are things like greed, the base instincts or base swabhavs that are stopping us from being able to fully accept the nourishment of the sun. That's kind of what I was thinking about. And that's what it is. If we understand ourselves to be the soul, we have to understand also what the soul is and isn't. And it's kind of what you were saying, though, a way where we're not the body, right? We're not the mind, we're the soul. And these, things that are blocking me from experiencing the nourishment of the sun, things like ego, anger, or fear, or greed, or those things belong to the body. They don't belong to the soul. They're not a part of that. Those are totally separate things. And once we are able to appreciate that and accept it, then we can accept the full nourishment that this provides us.
So, what we're talking about is, going back to the pleasure ladder, it's, material is look at what I have. Experiential is look at what I did. Service is look who I helped. Spiritual is look who I am, right? It's the idea of Atmagnan, knowing myself is not the body, but rather the soul, the Atma. But within our faith tradition, we actually then take that idea and we take it one level up with the concept of associating that soul with God. And we were speaking earlier, Rashmi, about Bhagavan Swaminarayan's teaching in the Vaishnava, and I know you had some specific thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, Maharaj, Bhagavan Swaminarayan, in his spiritual discourses that are captured in the Vachamrit, that's the name of the Granth of the spiritual scripture. Maharaj explained many times actually in the Vachamrit that we are trying to overcome our body and the swabhavas, doshas, the qualities of the body to understand ourselves to be Atma. And the Atma is something that is, Maharaj uses different words to describe it. Sat, Chit, Anand. That's a phrase that Maharaj says all the time, that the Atma is actually Sat, it's true in its nature, it's Chit, it's conscious, and it's Anand, it's blissful. So the things that are holding us back, if it's sorrow or desire or ego or whatever, those qualities don't belong to the Atma. So ultimately we want to associate and understand ourselves to be the Atma. But then Maharaj takes it a step forward, and he goes that it's not just about becoming the Atma. Once you become Atma, you will enjoy the Anand, the bliss of being Atma. But the source of that bliss is actually Paramatma. It's God himself. And the way to attain that bliss, to really immerse ourselves in the bliss of God, is to be in service of God, to experience the glory of God, and to fully immerse ourselves in that. And so service is not the end all be all. Even if we were to become Atma or to become fully realized as Atma, that doesn't become the end all be all. We're actually supposed to then take it to the last step, which is, now that I've separated myself from the body, I am the Atma, let me immerse myself in Paramatma, in the service of Paramatma.
Well, I think what you're saying is pretty interesting, because if you realize that the nature of the Atma is Sat Chit Anand, the consciousness that you have to even experience the happiness of that fancy car or flying first class, actually emanates originally from the Atma, because consciousness resides in the Atma. And what you're experiencing is not the thing or the experience. That isn't the source of happiness. What we're saying here is that it's the nature of the Atma to experience it. Like, it is the reason why you're able to experience happiness is because it's rooted in the Atma. And the beautiful thing here is that it doesn't stop there. There's a source of even the Atma. There's a Paramatma. There's the higher friend, the eternal friend within our Atma, where even the Atma gets its source from. So we're going each ladder or each step forward, and we're realizing that God is the source of all happiness. And this reminds me again of the experiences of Pramukh Swami Maharaj that we've seen ourselves, where they could be, flying in first class one day, and the next day they could be in a rural village in India, visiting a poor farmer's home, and they have an equanimity in either circumstance. We have seen that Pramukh Swami Maharaj would have had a heart attack, and he would, in the very next minute, think not about the pain that he's suffering in his physical body, but think about making sure that people around him are being fed, right? There's something that happens here where he's so equanimous, he's so beyond the ups and downs of life. And it tells me that this happiness that he's deriving pleasure from is this bliss of God. And I think quite often, when we think about God, there are so many different definitions of people think that God is this external figure way out there, silently sitting and judging everyone. But the Hindu understanding of what God is quite different. The Hindu understanding of God is that God is an eternal friend. He's within us. He's within the Atma. He's within the true self. And so going back to the car analogy, we certainly on this path of life, we're the driver within this car, but we're not alone on this drive. We have someone who's always with us, who's always listening to us, who's here to give us guidance and support and help. And it might be difficult for us to experience this friend who's within us, but if we take the spiritual teachings of a God-realized guru, a God-realized person, someone who's in communion with God, we can start to experience that a little bit more deeply. And I think that is perhaps the most compelling case for making God a center point of our life, making spirituality a center point of your life. As we practice this, I've certainly experienced a deeper awareness of this eternal friend through things like prayer, through things like going to a sacred space like a temple or a mandir. I'm able to start touching that a little bit more. And I think it's coming with age where the material things in my life are becoming less and less important. Going back to Kashyap, your point, that car has a little bit less juice. Even charitable giving and giving your time and your space starts to have a little bit less juice. But if we start to orient ourselves to God, if we start to dedicate these actions instead to God, you can start experiencing a little bit more happiness, a little bit more peace, more bliss in your life. So it's not about giving up everything in the world, but it's about dedicating these actions to God instead. And when you start doing that, that bliss of God starts to creep in more and more.
Thinking about, my relationship with the divine. God is not a concept. God is companionship. And we don't need God. We don't need guru because we're weak, right? Each of us is independent. We have our own volition. We're strong. We don't need God because life is terrible. Life doesn't suck. We don't need God because life is painful. We don't need God because tradition says we must believe in God. We need God. We need that true guru because eventually everything else fades. That's what this conversation is for me. That's what it really shines a light on. Everything else fades. Every relationship fades. Our health fades. Material wealth fades. The memory of experiences fades. The joy of service eventually fades. But that relationship with God deepens over time. It becomes more meaningful. It provides more peace. And at the end of the day, have you ever met anyone that says, I am just sick and tired of being so peaceful. I'm sick and tired of being so filled with joy or warmth. That person doesn't exist. And that's really what this conversation leads me to understand even better, that we need God, we need that true guru, because everything else is temporary. Everything else is transient.
I think that's right. I think where service, where everything starts fading, the spiritual path, our connection to our guru, our connection to God, that starts playing a much more meaningful role, and it provides this fulfillment that we're not able to get from other places.
For me, what's coming up is that this ladder that we have within the Hindu way of life of dharma, arth, kam, and moksha is in some ways telling me that if I make moksha, if I make the attainment, this relationship with God at the center point of my life, then the arth and kam, those things may have their ups and downs, but I will be centered throughout life. I won't let external things really sway me too much. And I can stay centered. I can be blissful even now. It's not something that comes at the end of my life. It's something I can experience every single day And I'm just grateful right now for all the spiritual practices in my day that I've learned from my guru that keep me grounded in that keep me grounded in that realization. So it might be prayer, it might be going to a sacred space, like a temple, but all those things remind me of this ultimate connection, this deeper connection. And I shouldn't take these practices for granted because they really do serve a purpose.
Well said.
So if this conversation was interesting to you and you want more of these sorts of conversations with us, make sure you subscribe to this podcast, leave a review for us, and share it with a friend. Share it with someone who might benefit from listening to this conversation. And until next time, namaste.